we're going to watch a video from Stephen Fry that I've recently come across. Let's take a look.
We tend to set ourselves goals of, if only I could live in that kind of a village in the south of England, quite near a station and nice little house, but not too expensive. And then you get it. And so, you live in the suburbs. Hooray. Oh, maybe that car, that new one there, that Tesla or whatever, then I'll be happy. You don't literally say, then I'll be happy, but there's a kind of sense of that's all I really want. And each of these goals is met, and it isn't it. The line of T.S. Eliot, that's not it. That's not it at all. And we go through life thinking, that's not it. There is something in all of us, a need for connection and love and truth and a sense of something beautiful beyond. You're never happy because of your status, because of things you've achieved. Happiness comes from somewhere else. And of course, I've yet to meet anyone who can tell you where it comes from.
So Stephen Fry holds a special place in our hearts.
Yeah.
Because he was formative in the creation of this channel. And before we tell you about that story, let's just analyze what he said there. So what did you take away from that?
So I can't disagree with most of what he said.
Yeah.
So, he talked about...
Apart from the last line, maybe.
Apart from that was right at the end. And of course, there's nobody who could have told me possibly what the answer to that question was. All right, okay, Stephen. But we'll get to that in a minute. I think the key point he's making is that he's an older gentleman. I don't know how old he is. Let's just have a look at how
fine, it's relevant.
How old is he? No, it is relevant. He's 65 now, born in 57. So, I mean, he's an older guy, and he's I think this happens to a lot of people as they get older, that they start to realize that all of those things that they set themselves up for in life, all the achievements and the goals that they had for themselves, none of them, despite having achieved them often, have actually brought them what they sought. And it's similar to what we discussed in our last live stream about the Love Songs and Age Philip Larkin poem.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go through that again. But the key point, I think, is that he's saying that the hole in his heart has not been filled by his material achievements. And, Stephen Fry's material achievements are many. I mean, he is one of the most recognizable faces in the Western world, and he has attained a status as, rightly or wrongly, as an intellectual, and as a comic and an actor, and as a cultural icon for the Brits in particular.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just really up there.
Yeah.
Out of all the people.
Yeah.
So, yet despite that, he's confessing before the camera there that none of that really brought him any lasting contentment and peace of mind.
Yeah.
So I think he talks about the hole in the heart, and other people have called it a God-shaped hole. So if you remember our interview with David Belinsky,
right,
he made reference to the fact that there is a God-shaped hole. I think he did in our interview, or if he didn't, he may have done it in a previous interview I watched of him.
Yeah.
He talks about the God-shaped hole, and he was quoting, in fact, someone else.
Yeah.
As you can see, I've come very prepared with that statement. But Stephen Fry doesn't want to say the word God.
Yeah.
But he gets as close as possible to saying God without saying God. He says that we want something which is, beautiful and perfect, which is beyond us, right? Which is, and in that expression, he's kind of talking of something which is transcendent.
Yeah.
Right? But what transcendent of what? Presumably material reality, presumably everyday human experience, presumably something which is absolute and fundamental to the universe, not something which is incidental and contrived.
Right. So what you're saying is that he's recognizing that the worldly things which he has gained in abundance, which he has achieved so well, are not enough. And he's thinking, well, if I've conquered the world in a way he has in his sphere, which is quite a lot, which is quite an expansive sphere. He has conquered that world, but that's not enough. So he's recognizing I need to go beyond the world, something beautiful beyond. But then he says there is nothing that can, there's no one that I've met that can actually tell me that.
He said, of course.
And you can almost tell there was I think, and this is speculation, but I think there was an element of self-deception there when he said that. Even in the pause that he gave before that, it was a sense of, there was a sense that he was in denial of something.
Well, the fact that he said, of course, is almost funny because...
she doth protest too much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she doth protest too much. So he's almost like saying, oh, well, I'm boxed into a corner because nobody's been able to give me the answer, of course, right?
Yeah.
Which is almost like trying too hard to convince people that nobody's ever given him an answer to that question.
Yeah. Now, before we then dive into our answer to it, let's go to what Stephen Fry said about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, something like that, in a video that he did for the British Humanist Society. I think they renamed themselves later as Humanists UK. And we'll see what Stephen Fry said at that point about the meaning of life and the purpose of life. And we'll see how far he's come. Let's have a look.
How can I be happy? Some people believe that there is one single meaning of life. They think that the universe was created for a purpose, and that human beings are part of some larger cosmic plan. They think our meaning comes from being part of this plan and is written into the universe waiting to be discovered. A humanist view of meaning in life is different. Humanists do not see that there is any obvious purpose to the universe, but that it is a natural phenomenon with no design behind it. Meaning is not something out there waiting to be discovered, but something that we create in our own lives. And although this vast and incredibly old universe was not created for us, all of us are connected to something bigger than ourselves, whether it is family and community, a tradition stretching into the past, an idea or cause looking forward to the future, or the beautiful wider natural world on which we were born and our species evolved. This way of thinking means that there is not just one big meaning of life, but that every person will have many different meanings in their life. Each one of us is unique, and our different personalities depend on a complex mixture of influences from our parents, our environment, and our connections. They change with experience and changing circumstances. There are no simple recipes for living that are applicable to all people. We have different tastes and preferences, different priorities and goals. One person may like drawing, walking in the woods and caring for their grandchildren. Another may like cooking, watching soap operas, savouring a favourite wine or a new food. We may find meaning through our family, our career, making a commitment to an artistic project or a political reform, in simple pleasures such as gardening, in hobbies, or in 1,000 other ways, giving rein to our creativity or our curiosity, our intellectual capacities or our emotional life. The time to be happy is now, and the way to find meaning in life is to get on and live it as fully and as well as we can.
So, I mean, they actually updated the animation from when we responded to it many years ago.
Yeah, it was all about us, I think. It was all because of us.
Yeah, I'm sure that's why they updated this soulless animation. So that was, just to break down what he's saying there, he's very confident that you can have meaning and purpose in life from just based on your own kind of whims, priorities, interests, etc., etc. Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's sculpture.
Yeah. Soap operas.
Maybe it's waving slightly like these animated heads do. Whatever it is, you can find your purpose in that rather than cosmic design being, woven into the fabric of the universe. It's actually just our whims. And if you follow your whims and your personal preferences, you can find your happiness basically that way. And how do you find that contrast in a fairly short period of time? 10 years.
Yeah, because in the first video, he was pretty explicit that it doesn't matter. He was like, it really doesn't matter what you do. You just end up miserable. And you just end up at a place where...
The contemporary video now.
Yeah, in the contemporary video. So the first video we show is like, it doesn't matter what you do. It seems to be the case. We all have a hole in our heart and it's always looking for something which is beautiful and extraordinary and transcendent. And nothing we do, none of our status that we achieve, he mentioned, none of the ambitions that we have in our lives, none of them really fill that hole. And we're always left with a sense of longing and loss. And whereas in this video he's like, well, if you want to do gardening, you get that shovel out. If you want to I don't know, what was the other one, sculpture, soap operas, political cause, I mean, there's basically he was saying that there are 1,000 different ways to find your meaning depending on your interests in life.
Yeah.
And in the first video we show, which is his later video actually, he's saying that it doesn't matter what you do, you're always going to be miserable.
So what do you think that says about his own journey then?
I think it says, I mean, we were talking about the evolution of Stephen Fry. I mean, in a sense, I think, to be honest, I think Stephen Fry probably knew that he would be miserable, that these things don't satisfy when he made the humanist video.
Essentially, yeah.
You know, but the reality is he was pushing the party line on the Humanist Association.
Yeah, and atheism was, the new atheism was still in much stronger force back then.
Yeah.
And now there's this cultural shift towards recognizing that taking meaninglessness as your meaning, surprisingly, is an unfruitful approach to life.
Yeah, so I mean, they he says, oh, you can have meaning in doing this and doing that and doing this and doing that. Really, what he was saying is there's almost an infinite number of ways you can distract yourself from the question of your purpose in life.
Yeah,
that's actually what he's saying, which is that, and then as long as you can just keep on the hamster wheel of your particular interest without looking out to the wider universe and asking yourself the big questions, you could just maybe be struck down by a heart attack terribly one day, and you won't even have to have considered the real serious questions. And so that might be able to be sufficient for your existence. And
he began the video from 8-10 years ago talking about essentially deriding, not explicitly, but in a way implicitly, the religious perspective that design and purpose is, as I say, woven into the fabric of the universe and is something that is set for us, something which we have to discover rather than create. And what is that from? I guess we're going to be talking from the Islamic perspective, though I think in many respects this is pretty shared across all the major religions. What is the Quranic take on this?
So the Quranic take is briefly, it's not something we discover even.
Or recognize.
The purpose of life is actually something we accept. Because the Quran describes itself as a reminder. And it's actually reminding you of what you already know, which he already explained in the first video, which is that he's looking for transcendent beauty. If you took the word to name God, I mean, that is most certainly one of the attributes of God he has described, transcendent beauty. As the famous saying in Islam goes, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that Allah says, I am beautiful and I love that which is beautiful. Allah is beautiful and loves that which is beautiful. And so what, in a way, he's doing is he's showing that his worldview is fundamentally flawed, okay? And it's actually fundamentally false.
Okay.
Because if he has a worldview which limits him to a way of being which is fundamentally unsatisfying for human beings, then how can that worldview be posited as the sustainable answer for how people should live their lives?
Yeah.
At a fundamental level, if his way of looking at the world cannot fulfill the human soul, the human spirit, the human psyche, you might say, then how can the Humanist Association continue to have that video up once he said that?
So what you're saying then is that him saying this now is testimony that the atheistic humanist, basically the atheist worldview, cannot satisfy us, and therefore is the wrong, is not how we are. It's not natural to us.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not intrinsic.
Yeah.
The fact that we actually long for something should be evidence that there is something.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be evidence that we're deluded.
Yeah.
Like, to begin with the premise that the natural, and he talks about how every human being is unique and different. Well, if every human being is so unique and different, why is it that every human being has this feeling of nothingness?
And this isn't exactly new, and that's the kind of thing that surprised me, was that he's saying something which has been known for thousands of years. Like, all the kind of wise people in society have been people who've been saying, don't chase material, design. Even the Stoics, I'm sure he's very familiar with, they spoke a lot about this. Don't be trapped up in the world. And they weren't like super spiritual or religious as such, although they had a degree of a lineage from Socrates, Prophet Socrates, as we believe he is, peace be upon him. Even they said, don't be trapped by this. And all the wise people of every age said, don't be trapped. But it's so strange that he's a kind of font of wisdom, or seen as a font of wisdom, but he's discovered this. But the way he spoke about it showed that he has real conviction, because obviously it's his life of experience.
Yeah.
But just going back to what you said about how there's still this longing. What does this tell you? This longing that we have for something beyond. what does it tell you? And is there, I think we have a quote from the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Yeah, maybe we could get that up on the screen. Can we get that up on the screen? That would be a good way of addressing it.
Okay, we got it. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, perfect. So he says, I don't know where you've got it from starting. What's the first line you've got there? Of the natural. Okay, so yeah, he says, this is in the book Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam, which is, if anybody wanted to find out what the teachings of Islam are and the kind of underlying true spirit of Islam, this is the book to go to. Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the Promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi. And on page 80, there's a section called Search for an Exalted Being. And he says, of the natural conditions of man is his search after an exalted being towards whom he has an inherent attraction. This is manifested by an infant from the moment of its birth. As soon as it is born, it displays a spiritual characteristic that it inclines towards its mother and is inspired by love of her. As its faculties are developed and its nature begins to display itself openly, this inherent quality is displayed more and more strongly. It finds no comfort anywhere except in the lap of its mother. If it is separated from her and finds itself at a distance from her, its life becomes bitter. Heaps of bounties fail to beguile it away from its mother, in whom all its joy is concentrated. It feels no joy apart from her. What then is the nature of the attraction which an infant feels so strongly towards its mother? It is the attraction which the true Creator has implanted in the nature of man. The same attraction comes into play whenever a person feels love for another. It is a reflection of the attraction that is inherent in man's nature towards God, as if he is in search of something that he misses, the name of which he has forgotten, and which he seeks to find in one thing or another, which he takes up from time to time. A person's love of wealth or offspring or wife, or his soul being attracted towards a musical voice, are all indications of his search for the true beloved. As man cannot behold with his physical eyes the imperceptible being, who is latent like the quality of fire in everyone, but is hidden, nor can he discover through the exercise of imperfect reason, he has been misled grievously in his search, and has mistakenly assigned his position to others. So, I mean, that probably summarizes this issue and gives the answer to it better than any human being has ever done so before.
You know, that the name of which he has forgotten is a really almost like a life-changing description.
Yeah, it is.
And if you think about what Prophet Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, is saying, is that he's kind of pointing out that right from our birth, we have a longing for something beyond us. And perhaps as a child, it's, you know, our horizons are very close to us. So it goes to the mother, and but there's something, a natural attraction, something beyond.
Yeah.
And, you know, what Stephen Fry said, he actually, got to give to the guy, he is articulate and insightful in many respects. And especially here
not insightful, I mean, he's insightful as to the problem. And
he's insightful into the depths of his despair. and he's placed his finger on it, which is that he's looking for something beyond him. Yeah. And this is what the Prophet Messiah was talking about, that we, even as a child, we recognize that there is something beyond, and we want unity with it. Yeah. And this is all a reflection of the ultimate, the one from whom we are. Yeah. You know, that is God, our creator. Yeah. Who is much, you know, to whom we owe much greater allegiance than even our parents.
And there's a lot to say about the second humanist video, we watched, and the first one still, which we haven't mentioned or touched upon. I mean, which comes to this particular issue, which is that he said at the end of the first video, he said, and of course, you know, I haven't found anybody to give me an answer to this. But as you've very well pointed out, I mean, this is religion 101. Yeah. This is belief in God 101, that the world will not satisfy you. Yeah. And that actually the search for God, who is that immanent, transcendent being, will. So that's number one. Then the second thing is, you know, in the humanist video, he talked also about the fact that there's no evident design from the universe, that they don't find any intrinsic purpose to the universe. But this is, you know, a great manifestation of the fact that, you know, there's that verse of the Quran that I'm thinking of, which says, you know, we will surely show them signs around them and within themselves. Yeah. This is one of the signs within himself. Yeah. And he's failed to recognize the signs that are around him of the fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that the universe came from a state of nothingness, the fact that all the laws and constants of nature are finely tuned to an extraordinary degree, which nobody has to go into detail. Yeah. I mean, you know, Stephen Fry will know that better than, you know, most people. Yeah. the fact that there are these extraordinary signs as to the intricate nature of the universe now clearly designed, not just life is, but the fundamental constants which permit a stable universe to exist.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, can you give any small example? Cosmological constant you could throw out, or
well, there's tons. I mean, if gravity was stronger, the universe would collapse in itself too quickly. That stars and solar systems and therefore planets like ours wouldn't form. If gravity was weaker, then it would expand out so rapidly that you wouldn't have you wouldn't have
stars
forming. Therefore, you wouldn't have the higher elements. And there's a million of these.
And the balance between those two is...
Yeah, all of them basically, especially if you take them together, they exist on a knife edge.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really beautiful what you said there about, the signs within yourself and the signs outside, because the first video, in a sense, he denied the signs outside of himself. In the second video, the more recent one, he acknowledged that he is recognizing something of a sign within himself.
Yeah.
But whether he truly appreciates it is another question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe we can introduce Stephen Fry to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and actually the author of the Quran, which is God himself. So what does the Quran say about what is our purpose? What does it say on this topic?
Yeah. So, I mean, the Quran is pretty explicit. It doesn't give you, when it comes to the purpose of human creation, it doesn't give you allegories and nice stories, tries to figure stories and just, you have to kind of derive it from a complex philosophical principle. It's very, very, very clear. Okay. Chapter 44, it states, "And we created not the heavens and the earth and all that is between them in sport. We created them not but for an eternal purpose, but most of them understand not." And then in other verses it explains, chapter 51, verse 57, "And I have not created the jinn and men, but that they should worship me. I desire of them no provision, neither do I desire that they should feed me. Surely it is Allah himself who is the great sustainer, the Lord of power, the strong." Wonderful, wonderful verse. And it's a beautiful, taking them together, I think they're very nice, because the first one, it says that there is an eternal purpose, but most people do not understand what that eternal purpose is. Yeah. And that the purpose of the heavens and the earth and its creation is not for sport, it's not a play.
Yeah, which is kind of, he was basically talking about playing.
Yeah.
In his original humanist video, he was talking about, do a bit of sculpture, do a bit of gardening, maybe some frisbee, and you'll be golden.
Yeah, and then the second verse, the quote I gave, which is, "I've not created the jinn and men, but that they should worship me." It's again one of these, I love these kinds of phrases that God uses in the Quran, because they are the strongest grammatical construction for a particular purpose. So if God said, "I've created the jinn and men that they should worship me," you might think, okay, well, that's our purpose, but our purpose could also be other things, right? Our purpose could also be gardening. It could also be this, because that's one of our purposes, to worship God. But then there could be other purposes, because the verse would just say, "I have created jinn and men that they should worship me."
Yeah.
But the way it's actually phrased is much more powerful. This is, "I have not created the jinn and men except that they should worship me." That there is an exclusion of all else besides the purpose that God gives. In the same way that the credo of Islam is La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, there is none worthy of worship except God.
Yeah.
Again, it's not that there is only one God, it's that there is nothing except God.
Yeah.
So, and then it goes on to say, "I desire of them no provision, nor do I desire that they should feed me." The first verse might give the person an impression that God needs us. That actually the reason for all this is because God wants some adoration, because he's insecure, that he just needs this kind of devotion to him. But, I mean, maybe you could explain what the meaning of worship is then, and actually what the fundamental purpose of life is.
Well, there's a very beautiful saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which he reported was revealed to him, where God said that I was a hidden treasure and I desired to be known, so I created the creation. And I remember you pointed out something very beautiful to me, which is that, if God had a need, he also fulfilled it himself, because he was able to, because the criticism may be, well, God therefore needs us. Yeah. But actually he doesn't need us, because he fulfilled his need through creating us.
Yeah, exactly.
And in doing so, he exercised his mercy, because we didn't exist and now we exist, and we're able to find spiritual fulfillment in relationship with God, and also enjoy his creation. In the next life we'll enjoy in the afterlife and the nearness to God himself. So like it's all kind of pure mercy and bounty that comes from God in fulfilling his own purpose. Now, abd, worship in the Islamic sense doesn't just mean physical worship. In fact, physical worship, as we understand it, kind of the prescribed prayers, that is in a sense, it's an ark or a ship for the underlying spirit, which is a way of refining yourself in a way that is pleasing to God, and whereby God will then come and reach you and develop his relationship with you. Yeah. So it's basically just a vessel. Worship, physical worship that we do, is a vessel for us to meet God.
Yeah, but it's absolutely necessary because, this is something that the second Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in this book I've just finished reading, Beacon of Youth, points out, which is that the reason, for example, that Christianity has no real fundamental why churches are being hollowed out from Christians, why Christians
being brought up by Muslims to mosques,
why Christians, so why Christians, for example, even if they have to turn up once a week to do their worship, and they can't even do that, whereas Muslims are filling mosques 5 times a day often, right, multiple times a day, or at least every Muslim should generally tends to go to the mosque at least once a day. So the reason is because they don't have a physical form of worship, because in rejection of the Jewish teaching, and the extremism of the Jews at the time of Jesus' appearance, which is that they emphasized the physicality and the ritual so much, they understood Jesus' message of focusing on the inner spirit as a rejection of entirely the ritual or entirely the physical movements. And as a result, the Christians have discarded all kinds of concept of a prescribed physical motion. And the consequence of that is that if you don't have to physically do something, eventually you stop doing the inner spiritual turning to God as well. Yeah. Because the physical motion actually preserved the opportunity for you to turn to God in your spirit. Yeah. Every Muslim has this experience that we will go to the mosque and pray, and we won't necessarily... We might, or at home, and we might finish our prayer and feel like, I didn't really do that as well as I could, right? I didn't really focus on God as well as I could. But it provided you the opportunity to do so. And the next time you then do it again for the physical worship, it provides you a fresh opportunity to perfect your worship. Yeah. But if you don't even have the physical prescribed postures, you don't have the safeguard, you don't have the guardian of your worship. It's gone. And so the physical worship is fundamentally necessary. And this is why I think, a lot of Christians, they kind of deride physical worship. They think of it as kind of like, beneath them. Yeah. That they're more philosophically enlightened, right? That they kind of can just turn to God and have like a spiritual reconnection with God. Yeah. And they fail to appreciate that the soul is tied to the body, and the body determines the motions of the soul. Yeah. So when you walk humbly, you feel humble. When you walk arrogantly, you feel arrogant. When you laugh, you feel happy. When you pretend to weep, you feel sad.
And the Quran talks about this, says walk on the earth humbly.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this book, Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam, explained this beautifully, that the physical postures are there to actually create the inner change and turn towards God, so that when we kneel or prostrate, we are kneeling and our soul kneels and prostrates to God.
The funny thing is that I think the Christians, in a sense, have recognized this with the evangelical movement. So they have then kind of put back in, kind of fabricated rituals through music, and through all of their kind of songs and dances and all this. Because I think they maybe recognize there needs to be something there that's substantial, which, you can gather people for, and there can be some kind of movement. Yeah. Unfortunately, that creates a kind of artificial heat, which is not real spiritual connection. Yeah. So that's, but it's interesting that they have potentially recognized that. But worship in Islam is this is what we've been talking about, is prayer, and the physical form of prayer and how it contains the spiritual prayer. But worship also has other aspects. So when you truly love God and you truly believe that God is beautiful, then you also try and adopt the attributes of God in yourself, right? And you actually try and reflect those qualities. And in a sense, that is an aspect of worship. It's a part of worship when you truly try and become like. Try and reflect God's attributes in yourself to whatever degree that you can. Yeah. And in fact, in a way, kind of all of the things in the commandments of God, if you follow them, they can be a type of worship in themselves, because you're submitting yourself and your entire character to God in that. So worship is actually something which is totally expansive in Islam. It is not just the 5 daily prayers, although that they are so substantial, it is something which can extend beyond those 5 daily prayers into actually everything that you do in your life. Because if you do it with the intention of pleasing God and of furthering your relationship with God, then it becomes a means of connecting to God, which is the essence of worship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, and it describes the qualities of a believer at the beginning of it. I believe it's the second quality it describes. I may have got that wrong, but it says that, those who establish prayer, and then it goes on to say, and spend out of that which we have bestowed upon them. The key point here is that it's not that people always take that to mean charity, that they're spending out of that which God has bestowed upon them in terms of money.
Yeah. Actually,
it doesn't say money. It says that which we have bestowed on them, which means intellect, emotion, feeling, time, all these kinds of things. They're all very important, fundamentally important, and actually God expects you to spend out of all of them for his sake. So Islam doesn't require word, and that is all part of your worship.
Yeah.
So it's not just the physical worship, it's actually every aspect of your life attains a sense of meaning and purpose, because it all becomes devoted to the one who created you. And that devotion manifests as seeking to benefit his creation fundamentally.
And the Quran also talks about that when it says, never shall you attain to righteousness until you spend out of that which you love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there's one thing I just want to quickly clarify before we move on, which is that we talked about in this verse where it says men and jinn. What is this jinn thing? Does that mean ghosts? What does that mean here?
A jinn is, misunderstood term by Muslims broadly, and the honest answer is that Sunni Muslims, for example, consider jinn to be energy spirits, that are some are good, some are bad.
Paranormal, basically.
Paranormal. Yeah. They basically describe them as paranormal phenomenon. There's no reason to do so. The Ahmadiyya Muslim perspective is pretty straightforward. Jinn simply means that the root of word of which jinn is derived is an Arabic word which means hidden, that which is hidden. So that's why you get Jannah, for example. Jannah is described as that which is hidden because it's described as the treetops. You cannot see the ground and the soil from
that which is hidden, that which is covered.
Right,
Majnun
exactly.
Means madness.
Majnun means madness.
Covering of faculties.
Exactly, because madness covers the faculty of reason. Majnun is from the same word. And then you also have the fact that you have, women are also described in the Quran as jinn. Not in the Quran, in Arabic literature as jinn, because they are hidden, they're veiled from society, typically because they wear the veil. So jinn simply means that which is hidden, and in terms of unseen. Yeah. So it refers to that class of people who are unseen. Now, who are the class of people who are unseen? The Queen, celebrities, extremely wealthy people who are
the real unseen are just the super rich that you don't see.
You don't see.
You don't
exactly.
know their name.
So the Quran addresses
the shareholders of banks.
Correct, because people think of them as they're actually they are in social terms a separate category.
Yeah, they live on a different planet
because they live in a different planet because they have unlimited wealth. They can do what they want. They want to be in Dubai one day and they want to be in Canada the next day. They can just go on their private jet and move.
Yeah,
right. They can eat what they want. They can live the kind of lifestyle that they want entirely. They are not constrained, even by some simple things as tax laws, by tax jurisdictions. So the Quran recognizes that there is a class of people who are not
the hoi polloi, the ordinary people.
Yeah, exactly. So jinn and ins. Ins means the man, the ordinary common man. It's important also because God often the people among the ins take people amongst the jinn to be their gods, to be their protectors in society.
Yeah.
And so God is actually drawing a point, which is that he is the God of the jinn as well.
Yeah.
The jinn ain't on a class with him.
Yeah.
Okay. The jinn are created beings just like the ins, the man. So that's simple. I wanted to read another verse, if that's okay, about the nature of this life.
Can I just also say jinn also therefore covers other forms of creation which we may not know about, or in a different planets or whatever. But it is expansive. But for the primary application of the Quran, which is to mankind, it means the people that you see and the people and nas is the people that you do see.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this verse, another verse of the Quran, which kind of it summarizes. Why don't you read it? Well, you've got it there as well.
Well, I mean, this is, I think, something which is, I think Stephen Fry has experienced this. Because if you think about kind of the riches which he has accumulated and the pride that which he has to a degree for being such a big person in society, he's also seen that it's kind of it's dry. There's nothing real there. So the Quran talks about this in chapter 18. It says, "And set forth for them the similitude of the life of this world. It is like the water which we send down from the sky, and the vegetation of the earth is mingled with it. And then it becomes dry grass, broken into pieces, which the winds scatter. And Allah has full power over everything. So the life of this world is like the water which we send from the sky, and it mixes with the vegetation, the crops, then it becomes dry grass broken into pieces and the wind scatter it," which is a very beautiful kind of description of the life that we lead. You know, people are famous in 1-2 generations, and then they're essentially forgotten apart from a few fans for maybe another 2 generations. Then they're basically lost to history. All of their kind of riches eventually many of them kind of lose them. They blow away. They're tied up in divorces or inheritance, you know, whatever it is. They can lose their money, and they experience these highs and lows, which are trials from God in themselves. But the beautiful thing about a connection and a real relationship with God is that it's with you wherever you are, and you could be a poor man living in a hut, and you can have that, and you'll be richer beyond, you know, Stephen Fry.
Yeah.
So, you know, potentially you could argue the best position to be in life is if you have that relationship with God, and you also have, you know, the goods of this world.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing per se wrong with that, but it becomes meaningless unless it's actually part of a spiritual package.
Well, I would say that the key point here is that the similitude of the life of this world, it applies to when the world is not utilized for a higher purpose. So, you know, we don't believe that a person who takes money and then uses it in the way which pleases God, that doesn't become dry grass which becomes scattered.
Absolutely.
That becomes an action which fulfills its purpose.
Yeah.
Right. So there's I love this.
You pass the trial.
Yeah, I love this particular hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He saw a goat, and it had been sacrificed, and all the meat was taken from it, and the only part of the goat that was left was the head. And he walked by it, and he said to his companions, "Everything is saved except the head."
Yeah.
So I love that, because it's an inversion, dependent on a view which looks at it through the purpose.
Yeah.
Right. So from the view of a worldly stance, everything was lost except the head.
Yeah.
From the spiritual perspective, everything was saved except the head, because the purpose was fulfilled for that animal.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a wonderful.
So much wisdom in that.
So much wisdom. You could just ponder it for days, and you'd still be getting more pieces out of it.
Well, I mean, how do we apply that to our own lives then? So, you know, you've got your job, you've got your money, you've got your time, you've got your family, your relationships, whatever it is. How do you apply that if you're a believer? What does that mean to you? How do you live that life then?
I think that you always have to make explicitly every intention has to be for the sake of God. Even if it be your job, even if it be making money, you have to be thinking about what am I going to do with this money? And you have to say to God, I'm going to do this and this and this with it. Because if you don't fill it with an intention for God, your ego will fill it, and it'll fill it quickly.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and your own sense of self will fill that the intention for which you're doing something. So if one is trying to seek the world, one has to be very careful how you do it. I think you have to approach it with a great sense of caution, and you have to be explicit in your mind as to why you're doing it and for what purpose is it going to serve you. Because in reality, from the spiritual perspective, it is better to not have wealth, for example, if one isn't going to actually use it in the right way, because it's going to become a burden on your neck on the day of judgment as to how you discharge this duty.
Yeah. How does that relate to zakat and the name zakat?
So, why don't you explain?
Okay, so I mean, I was just thinking that zakat is
what is zakat for the ordinary?
Zakat is
you may not know.
Zakat is it's a tax essentially it's a marginal wealth tax that Muslims are supposed to pay, and it's money which goes to the poor and the people in difficulty in society, and it was typically levied at 2.5% on kind of wealth that was unused over a certain amount that you need to survive on. So you can understand today as a marginal wealth tax essentially, and it's called zakat, which essentially comes from the root of the word is purification. It's this idea of when you purify something. So the tax which God has said you should pay on your wealth he has told you why you do it in the name itself of the practice, that this is something whereby you can actually purify your wealth, and whereby if you give this portion, which actually ultimately isn't that much, for the sake of God, it is something which can purify the whole. Right?
Yeah.
This is essentially the way of purifying the whole thing. And in a way, what you're talking about is you can pay zakat on everything in your life through your intentions and how you intend to use it and how you do use it.
Yeah.
Do you spend your time, at least a portion of your time, remembering God or for the sake of creation? And if you do so, then other aspects of your time will be blessed. And you can probably apply that to every different part of your life.
Yeah.
And that is the beauty of the spiritual outlook, is that it is something which pervades everything in your life, and everything suddenly then becomes imbued and enriched with meaning.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're an atheist, and we've talked about this before, if you're an atheist, that meaninglessness, which your outlook, which is inherent in the atheistic outlook, just pervades over everything, and it just washes over everything, such that anything that you do, no matter how good you think it is, no matter how nice you think it is, no matter what you think it will bring you, it's ultimately meaningless. I remember the Quran talks about that God has created us for an eternal purpose.
Yeah.
It's not a limited purpose. He specifies it's not for sport, because sport is all limited.
Yeah.
This is an eternal purpose, and that purpose is to worship God and to actually have a relationship with God. And you do that through explicit worship, and also through treating the rest of mankind and the creation of God in a goodly manner.
Yeah. So the second Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, he kind of refers to this emotion that Stephen Fry has outlined in the first video we played. I wonder if you want to...
Yeah, so I mean, no, I want you to say this. You go for it.
Okay, so he says, is in the periodical The Muslim Sunrise from 1953. Good find, Umar. He
Not
writes,
sure I found it originally, but okay.
He writes, no doubt God gives, and it's really applicable to Stephen Fry, which is why it's relevant. It says, no doubt God gives some people a goodly share of concentration of mind. These people strive to attain various objects, political, educational, and cultural, and as a result of continuous efforts, they gain success in their objectives and attain to peace of mind as well. But this peace of mind can be compared to the pleasure which children derive when they get toys. They get this peace of mind not by the achievement of the high objects of their life, but by forgetting them. They fall victims to the intellectual opium. Their brains feed intellectual opium to them. They do have pain, but cannot
feel it. Yeah, which is just incredible. I just want to read that last bit again. So they get this peace of mind not by the achievement of the high objects of their life, but by forgetting them. They fall victims to this intellectual opium. So they have the pain, but they cannot feel it, which I think is a warning to intellectual people in particular, because intellectual people can take pride in their intellectual achievements and their intellectual aspirations. And in a way, they've just got more advanced forms of toys of everyone else. If you're a bit of a, what's the word? Dullard, is that a word? Shows I'm not in that class, clearly. If you're someone who's not particularly smart and you're kind of, impressed by shiny things, maybe you'll go chasing those shiny things and you'll be trying to get the latest car or the latest phone. And that's your kind of, that you think may be the purpose of your life. And the intellectual person may look down on that and say, I'm going to figure out, what is personal identity? That's my thing. That's going to be what I contribute to this world. But if that is kind of your purpose alone, then it is essentially just a sophisticated toy which you're toying with.
Yeah.
If you're actually divorced from real truth. So it's kind of a warning, I think, to intellectual people not to fall prey to that, because ultimately, like Stephen Fry is actually saying, and so many intellectuals, so many philosophers have had this experience. Many have ended up killing themselves despite their apparent intellectual achievements, because they realize it's still meaningless. Like they figure out, they believe so much, and they do their best to get to what they think is the truth of things. Obviously they cannot, because their whole outlook is skewed, but they do make intellectual progress in various ways, great scientists, and they're still just as unhappy as the person who spent his whole life trying to get a Ferrari and then got a Ferrari and realized, oh, okay, it's just a Ferrari. It
was Matt Damon, I think, who said it really nicely about his Oscar. I remember you told me about this.
Yeah. He said he got his Oscar when he was like 19 for Good Will Hunting, and he said, "Thank God I didn't." I think he put it in his toilet or something, and he said, he's looking at it, and he said later to his mum, "Thank God I didn't spend my whole life chasing this, because It's just a prize, the high of the winning it goes down, you get off stage, you go to the after party, you come home, you got the prize, and then the next day you carry on living your life.
Yeah.
The effect of these things wane.
Yeah.
So whoever you are in society, it doesn't matter, because we've all been created by God, and our purpose is actually all the same.
Yeah.
And if you've been blessed with intellect, then don't make that blessing into a trial for yourself and distract yourself, but use it for the sake of God's creation, and use it to advance your relationship, or to understand God better, so that you can advance your relationship with him.
Yeah. I mean, this is the problem. I mean, especially for intellectual people, they find it much harder sometimes to come to God, because it becomes an idol for them.
Their own intellect.
Their own intellect becomes an idol for them. And they can't get, because all around them, they see that they are superior to others.
Yeah.
They find it impossible to recognize the fact that their superiority over others is like a person who has 3 pennies compared to one who has 1 penny. Look before a king who has an infinite treasure.
Yeah.
You don't go to the king who has infinite treasure and start boasting of the fact that you have 3 pennies and your mate's got 1.
Yeah.
Because you look like a moron, right? Because, it's a meaningless thing to even talk about.
Yeah.
But this is, people are so wrapped up in their comparison with other human beings, they forget that we're all equal before God. Your intellect compared to somebody else is like the intellect of a fly compared to that of an ant.
Yeah.
To a human.
Yeah.
A greater difference.
Yeah.
So it's actually born out of a failure to recognize the true reality of God. And if you reflect, this is one of the blessings of science and modern advancement, that if you really reflect and do a little bit of learning about how intricate basic things in the universe are, how complex simple organism structures are.
Well, you're an ITU doctor. I mean, you must have learned tons of this for physiology.
Yeah, of course, and you did a medical degree as well. So I mean, but you don't need to be a medic. You don't need to have studied a degree in human physiology to be able to look up the fact that this little fly that's flying around in my face is actually extraordinarily complex
and quite annoying.
Drosophila.
The basis of the whole of human biological advancements, Drosophila.
Yeah. So I mean, you don't have to be some great intellectual who's done degrees in this. It is so complex. Biological organisms, that when you then really try and perceive how complex and how advanced and how beyond that being must have been who created all this, it serves as a fantastic a guidepost. But it doesn't serve as a guidepost for Stephen Fry for some reason. Maybe we'll give it another 10 years and he'll have evolved a bit further and he'll start to...
maybe he'll join us in the studio, God willing.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Fry, you are most welcome to join us in the studio. We'd love to have you. We have another camera. We could put you right there. And we can
even get a chair.
We can even get a chair for you. I'm sure we can get that in the budget.
Yeah.
No, we've got chairs over there. We've got it all sorted. Just come over. So...
Yeah, and there's something else which strikes me, which I think is a problem of intellectual people, is that I think when they see the people rushing to prayer, they think they're quite simple, and some of them may well be quite simple people, but actually they've gone further than the great intellectuals if they recognize God, because they recognize that actually the truth is fairly simple. Yeah, obviously we haven't been created for no purpose. Obviously there's a reason we're here, and probably all the religions of all the major cultures, they're probably roughly right, and I'm actually going to devote myself to this, even if it's just hedging my bets, rather than devote myself to memorizing QI or something.
But of course, nobody's actually provided that answer to Stephen Fry.
No one except for everyone.
Of course, no one.
Everyone in history, essentially.
Yeah, every single human. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a person of immense intellect, and from a kind of academic standpoint, and a person of immense historical knowledge, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
He should know better than anybody else.
Yeah.
What the lessons of history are and what the different cultures of history teach us. There's a beautiful Quranic verse which ties this question of purpose together with the question of suffering, which is, pretty much the only argument atheists actually have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was wondering if you could
go for it.
You sure? Okay, so the Quranic verse, chapter 2, verse 156 to 157, it states, "And we will try you with something of fear and hunger." So this is God speaking to humans. "And we will try you with something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and lives and fruits of labor. But give glad tidings to those who patiently persevere, who, when a misfortune overtakes them, say, surely to Allah we belong and to him shall we return." So how does this tie into the question of purpose and what's its role?
Well, because I think if you think about, the opening line of that about we will try with something of, fruits and we will try with something of fear and hunger So fear of losing things, hunger of not actually having those things, and the loss of wealth, the provision that you have
to get things.
Yeah, lives, so the lives of those that you love, and also your faculty of life and your health, and the fruits of your labor. That all these things which Stephen Fry has been talking about, that these are things which people try and get, and they realize that they're nothing ultimately. These are the things that ultimately also are things that are taken away from you. Inevitably, whoever you are in this world, you're going to have trials, you're going to have suffering, you're going to have difficulties. No one is immune to this. Even just aging, you're going to have the problems of aging. You have your parents aging and dying, and you're going to have relationships that break down, and you're going to have, wealth that fades away. No one is immune to this. And God is saying that we will try you. No matter who you are, you will be tried via these things which you take as your God. But give glad tidings to those who are patient, to those who are steadfast. And these are those who, when a misfortune overtakes them, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This is what Muslims say when someone dies. And it means, surely to God do we belong, and to him shall we return. And the reason why we have been instructed to say this is because when we lose something and when we suffer, it reminds us that that thing is not eternal. That thing was always transient. And we should never put ourselves fully in that transient thing. Rather, that thing came from God and was the creation of God. And God is the one who is eternal. So it's a reminder that don't put yourself in these temporary things.
And that we shall return to God.
Yeah, absolutely. We shall return to God.
We are one of those things.
Absolutely.
That's going to go as well.
Well, we have come from God,
yeah,
and we are going to go back to God, and everything in our life has come from God and goes back to God. So we're going to come here, things are going to come into our lives, and go back to God, they're going to return, and then we're going to go back. So ultimately,
and we will be one of those trials for somebody else who loves us.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, and ultimately, the prayer that we're taught to, to say reminds us of that we should only attach ourselves truly in our heart of hearts to God, because he is the only one that will actually be there forever. That is the only eternal source of stability and joy, is your relationship with God. So, what Stephen Fry was talking about he's experienced this.
Yeah.
He's experienced this.
Yeah.
But the step which he hasn't taken, it seems, is that he hasn't said, okay, well, all of this stuff he has said all of this stuff isn't my purpose, but he hasn't recognized that this should then take you to that which is eternal.
Yeah.
The great beautiful beyond.
Yeah.
He knows what it is. I think he knows what it is, because he can't not, because he's intellectually too smart not to know what the answer is, but he's in denial about it, so he doesn't recognize it.
He's smart enough to hide it from himself.
Yeah. Well, everyone knows, like you said, that the Quran is a dhikr. We know in our heart of hearts, even if you haven't got any degrees and you're probably deaf and dumb, you probably recognize something there.
Yeah.